And welcome, everybody. Thank you again for joining us. Appreciate it very much. As Vas mentioned, we're going to be talking to you today a little bit about the intersection and the overlap and the collaboration, or whatever the right word would be, between the FinOps practice and IT asset management, or ITAM. I'm Brian Adler. I'm our Director of Cloud Market Strategy at Flexera, but in a not too recent, distant past, or whatever the right phrase is, I was an analyst at Gartner, IT analyst at Gartner, focusing purely on cloud computing. And the large percentage of the discussions I had with clients, actually I did the numbers right as I left, 37% of the calls that I took over the 2.5, 3 years I was there was around cloud financial management, sort of FinOps before we called it FinOps, right? Folks talking about overspend, how to become more efficient, all those kinds of things. So talk to thousands of customers about, about this discipline, and we're going to talk today a little bit about how it intersects and overlaps, like I said, with IT asset management. I also want to let my good colleague and good friend Jeremy introduce himself as well.
Thanks, Brian, and great to be here, everybody. Jeremy Chaplin. I'm a Senior Cloud Solution Architect here at Flexera. My background is also in cloud financial management, maybe not quite as long as Brian, but prior to that I was working in the fintech space, building applications with very little or no consideration for cost. So it's great to be on the other side of the fence and kind of understand the implications there.
Yeah. And I also wanted you all to hear Jeremy's awesome British accent, so you also know he's jet lagged, and if he dozes off during my portion, it's not from boredom. All right, exactly. So, all right, whoops, so two here. So real quick, introduction to ITAM. A real quick poll, who here knows what ITAM is? And no offense if you don't. Okay, good. All right, so those ITAM folks in the house, I know you're going to be grossly disappointed. Super 30,000 foot view here, if you will, right? But I kind of tried to draw IT service management. ITSM is probably the thing you're familiar with, the ServiceNows of the world, the Churwells, that kind of stuff. I'm sitting in front of a portal and I want a red stapler and I hit go and I get that red stapler delivered to me, right? That asset, that red stapler, now needs to be managed. Someone needs to track the life cycle of it, right? And obviously it's not just staplers, it's servers and hardware and all this other kind of stuff. Well, that is then the responsibility, obviously, of the IT asset management, or ITAM, side of the house. And again, this is a super simplification, but within IT asset management, we have SAM, software asset management, which we'll be focusing on here, hardware asset management, i.e. that red stapler or whatever the case may be. We won't dwell on that much because there's not much H in the cloud, right? H is someone else's responsibility, right? But we do need to worry about and be concerned about the software asset management aspect of that. And in particular, you see there in little print, software license management, or SLM, right? We're going to talk a lot about sort of the role of bringing those licenses and BYOL. You might have heard bring your own license to the cloud, and how the ITAM folks have that knowledge. Maybe the FinOps folks don't, and we need to bring those two to the table, if you will. Why does this matter to FinOps practitioners? Well, here's just a few examples, right? If, for example, you're in Amazon Web Services, you have license considerations around things like dedicated hosts, right? One of the reasons dedicated hosts was originally brought, not just for performance, was also for the ability for folks to have licenses that are tied to MAC addresses, right? Some software vendors still have things that are tied to MAC addresses, where you can't have a fixed MAC address in the cloud unless you get a fixed dedicated host, if you will. If you're running an EC2, any Microsoft software, you got to worry about software assurance, license mobility, all that kind of stuff. If you're running, for example, Oracle database on RDS, you might have an Oracle on-prem license, and you might be able to leverage that in the cloud, right? So you need to worry about that potential license consideration. They have bare metal infrastructure, again, for a lot of the same reasons that they had dedicated hosts. This is more performance, but again, licensing can be tied to that as well. And then you might get stuff from the AWS Marketplace that has software license considerations. In Azure, they have what they call hybrid use benefit, AHB or AHUB. Real quick poll, how many folks here are an Azure user, Microsoft Azure? Okay, and then of those folks, how many of you know what AHB is? Okay, most of you. If you don't, just quick shout out, please take a look into it. Brain dead easy way to save money, okay? You probably could save some money by leveraging AHB. So a great example there, right? That's where sort of those ITAM folks, the SAM folks of the house probably are aware of that or can help you with that. Red Hat and SUSE, right? You might have licenses for that you can bring into the cloud. Bare metal infrastructure marketplace, same concept as with AWS. Google Cloud Platform, they have sole tenant nodes. That's sort of their equivalent of the dedicated hosts. Custom images, where you've rolled some software in there that might have license implications. And again, bare metal infrastructure in the marketplace as well. And then when you get into other stuff, like for example, containers, IBM Cloud Paks and sub-capacity licensing, and ILM and ILMT, if you're familiar with that, CPU allocation, how many you allocate and how many licenses you need to consume, et cetera, right? So here's just a few examples of where, as FinOps folks and FinOps practitioners, we might not necessarily have thought about this, right? We thought about the infrastructure and how to fine-tune that from a cost perspective, but you have to think about what you're running on and the money that you're spending on what you're running on that infrastructure. All right. I want to talk a little bit about a little bit of data and some numbers here. The state of the cloud and state of ITAM. If you've heard of Flexera for one reason and one reason only, it might be the Flexera State of the Cloud report. We're in our 11th year of that now. Started in obviously 2012 with what was called the RightScale State of the Cloud report. If anybody's familiar with the RightScale State of the Cloud report, RightScale was acquired by Flexera in 2018. So what we have now is, if you're familiar with the RightScale State of the Cloud report, it has evolved, matured, whatever the right phrase is, into the Flexera State of the Cloud report. And I'll pat ourselves on the back here a little bit. It's sort of become the industry de facto standard on the pulse of the cloud computing industry. This year, we talked to 753 global tech pros in the C-suite through cloud developers, right? Everybody from the CIO, CTO, all the way through the guys banging on the keyboards, the cloud engineers of the world, if you will, and industries across the spectrum. Financial services was well represented, but so was manufacturing, folks that are running like AWS Outposts on-prem and stuff like that. We also have on the success, the heels of the success of State of Cloud, we have the State of ITAM report, which is a similar concept, right? We talked to 465 global ITAM stakeholders, again, the C-suite through the practitioners, and small, mid-sized businesses, sub 1,000, all the way up to the 50, 60, 100,000 employee corporations to try to get that wide range of input across the spectrum. And what you're going to look at now is some of the data that we've pulled out from those two reports, and you'll see kind of how it's showing this either disconnect or opportunities for these groups to work together, the ITAM folks and the FinOps folks. This is from State of the Cloud. We asked folks, what are your top cloud initiatives? And if you want, State of the Cloud, by the way, is available on the Flexera website. Go under resources. You can get this year's plus the previous 2, 3, 4 years, whatever the case may be. We asked them their top cloud initiatives. And you'll notice number one, and it's been number one for 6 years running, optimizing the existing use of cloud, i.e. FinOps stuff, right? How do we become more efficient with our spend? Number two, migrating more workloads to the cloud. We're going to start to put more into the cloud, and as such, we're going to need to optimize that as well. And then we're moving from on-premises software to SaaS. That's, again, an opportunity where those SAM folks can come ahead and participate. They're probably familiar with the on-premises licenses. They might be able to assist you with that move to SaaS. And then a little further down, I highlighted as well, managing software licenses in the cloud. This was only in the low 20s last year. This year's made a jump to 33%. Folks are starting to realize, aha, the licenses for the stuff I'm running on this infrastructure that I've been fine-tuning matters as well, all right? We then asked them, what are your metrics? What's good for you, right? How are you measured against your cloud goals? Number one, as always, cost efficiency and savings. Again, right in the sweet spot of what we've been talking about here. And then you notice in number 4 is cost avoidance. And the reason I highlighted that one is, for example, if you're using that AHB that we talked about before, right? If you're a SAM practitioner and you're aware of this Azure hybrid benefit, and you can go ahead and move this license into the cloud and not pay for it, that's cost avoidance, right? I'm now running the same software I did before and I didn't have to buy a new license. So it might not be a cost efficiency or savings, but it was cost avoidance. Whoops. There we go. Whoa, this is touchy. Here we go. Wait a minute. Wait for it. There we go. This slide made me happy, and the next one made me sad, and I'll tell you why. The reason this one makes me happy, we asked folks about a CCOE, Cloud Center of Excellence, you might be familiar with, right? What I learned in my Gartner days is that not everyone knew the phrase CCOE. It was actually, I think, coined by Gartner. I think actually Lydia Leong, if you happen to know her, I think she's actually the woman who came up with the phrase. But we also would ask them, hey, do you have a Cloud Central team or a cloud, a cloud team of some sort? And they said, yeah. So we kind of lumped those together, right? CCOE or Cloud Central team, essentially the same thing in my mind. You notice that 36 or 35%, so 71% of folks have said, yes, we have one of these, and another 11% next year. So 12 months from now, in theory, 80%, more than 80% of folks out there will have a CCOE or similar in place, which is great, right? It's not just a repository for best practices and blessed services and things like that, but also where some of these FinOps practices can start to germinate, or whatever the right phrase would be, right? So this is the part that made me happy. This is the part that made me sad. We said, okay, let's dig into those cost management responsibilities a little bit more. And you see it going across the left side down the column, and we said, here's the responsibilities. And we said across the top right here, said, where do these responsibilities fall, right? And so I've highlighted a few that I thought were interesting. Optimizing SaaS usage and costs, right? Something that the SAM folks are probably very familiar with. And governing software licenses and IaaS and PaaS. Again, something they're probably very good and very familiar with, right? Notice that 44, 50, 42, 49, a lot of that is falling under the cloud team or CCOE or the infrastructure and ops team. I've been on both of those, and I knew nothing about software licensing. That shouldn't be my job, right? I'm not going to be very good at that, right? Look at over here, purple is bad, right? And over here, we look at the SAM folks, 7%, 10%. The folks that are good at this, the folks can really, really help, aren't at the table, right? So here's a great example of, we've got this very much this siloing, not because of maliciousness, not because of animosity, just because they historically haven't had to work together, right? So let's bring these folks together. We asked folks, this is from the State of ITAM report, we asked, what are your challenges with SAM? And not surprisingly, if I'm a SAM person who's historically been on-prem, legacy, that kind of stuff, dealing with new environments, SaaS, cloud, and containers, I don't know anything about that, right? Hey, that's where I can lean on the FinOps folks, right? This is, again, where we can go ahead and do this cross-pollination. Finding ways to optimize software use, i.e. save money. That's a common goal across, regardless of what side of the house I'm on. Complexity of software vendor use rights. I should be probably pretty good at that if I'm on the SAM side of the house. If I'm on the FinOps side of the house, the cloud CCOE side of the house, maybe not so much. Again, a chance for us to work together. And then I threw this last one in here because of the sad purple bit here, right? They're not being seen as strategic in their organization, right? They can really help here, but they're not getting the chance to, right? So this is, again, Jeremy will get into a little bit about the how. And before I pass off to Jeremy, this is the last one I wrote, a bit of an eye chart, but the point of this one is lots of money is being spent and a significant portion of that's being wasted. What I'll call to your attention, I didn't highlight in green, I should have, but that center column on the top, the enterprise in purple, if you look at those last, well, 3 of 4, you have a 13, 13, and 11, 37% of enterprises, and that's organizations with 1,000 or more employees, 37% of them are spending $12 million per year in the cloud or more, i.e. more than a third, 37%, are spending $1 million a month on public cloud. That is a ton of money. And it lines up with what JR said this morning, excuse me, about his 500 billion or whatever it was, right? But the chart at the bottom shows, hey, of that $1 million a month you're spending, how much you think you're wasting? And on average, folks usually think roughly 30 to 33%, which I can say from historically back in the right scale days, it's usually even higher than that, particularly as you're new, right? You're new to the cloud. You don't know the cloud way yet. And you're making a bunch of missteps. You're over provisioning. You're not shutting stuff down. All these kind of things that we know not to do. We would often see folks running at 40, sometimes even 50% in terms of waste. So the takeaway here, lots of money being spent, but significant amount of it being wasted, right? And with the ITAM folks and the FinOps folks together, they can hopefully rectify that situation. So I'm going to pass it off to Jeremy, and he'll talk a little about how those two teams can work together.
Great stuff, Brian. Thank you so much. And you can tell from the context that Brian has given us there that there's the appetite to do something, right? Absolutely, people want to get involved. We've heard from JR, we've heard from others, in the keynotes and other sessions, I think, being run, in the rooms today, that SAM, software asset management, is on the agenda, right? It is clear in the statistics. It's clear that people have the opportunity to save some more of that 32%, right? So there's some big numbers involved. Let's dig in now and just understand how we can bring those things a little bit closer together. I debated whether to include this slide, really, because you should all know this pretty well, right? So the FinOps lifecycle, of course, is all about, the visibility, right? Getting some business context around what I'm spending, allocating that spend to parts of your organization so that they can make informed decisions about what they do with it, right? We know that stuff well. Being able to optimize it, then, after you've got that business context, understanding what the spend is for and how that supports your business, then we can look at ways of reducing that usage reduction, rate reduction. It's all bread and butter stuff for you guys now, as you get involved in this life cycle. And then ultimately operate, right? How do we continuously improve and measure that we're driving success, the processes that we're following are adding value, but also, how do we do that automatically, right? Everything we're doing in cloud right now, we're doing at scale, okay? So it's all right to go around these, a few times manually as you're in the crawl phases, but we want to accelerate that journey so that we can do it in a little bit of hands-off way, do it more frequently. Now, if I look at the same life cycle in the context of ITAM, it's pretty much the same experience, right? I need that visibility into license usage and understand what I'm entitled to use, right? What am I using? What am I paying for? Maybe on-prem, what am I paying Microsoft for that I could possibly use in cloud? But there are complexities, of course, in that informed stage. We've not just got virtual machines anymore, which could translate quite well to what I'm doing on-prem in terms of discovery. But we've also got an abstraction for containers. We've got PaaS services. Maybe we've got Azure Marketplace and all of those other things that we might need to consider when we look at the visibility of our license consumption. And then Brian mentioned, right, bare metal infrastructure, the MAC address, situation that we're in. You're entirely responsible for that. And it gives you freedom, of course, to put anything on there. But how do you do the discovery? How do you know, whether you're compliant in that space? And it's only then that we can move on and look at, well, okay, we understand that usage in the context of our business, like we do our cloud costs now. How do we optimize that? How do we use the A-Hub, the bring your own license agreements and things to reduce that infrastructure cost? Why pay twice for it, right? It's just insanity, really. Understanding, of course, that the lifecycle state in the cloud is a little bit different, right? In my on-prem data center, start, stop, terminate doesn't really mean anything, right? It's there, it's provisioned, and I'm paying for a license. What does lifecycle state mean for your license agreements that you have? And then optimize, of course, for us in terms of cloud, FinOps is about, savings, right? Making sure that the spend is aligned to the outcomes. But there's a compliance and a risk aspect to software license management, right? It might be that we're not actually saving any money by understanding our entitlements and our usage, but you can be sure that you'll be avoiding, the potential fines and implications should one of the vendors come along and want to audit you for that. And that's a big part of the kind of risk mitigation that the software asset management professionals typically have been performing. And then for operate, right, understanding that ever-changing license landscape. It's hard enough, right, as FinOps practitioners, keeping up with the cloud vendors, the new services and everything that are being provided. When you look at the complexities of license management, it's definitely an area that I don't want to get into personally, right? Super complex stuff, but we shouldn't be reinventing the wheel. We want to get those SAM professionals and the years and years of experience that they've had into the room and start talking to those guys. And we need to do that continuously. It's no good now, running a process that tells me what my license compliance is at the end of the month, when I might have containers and environments with ephemeral, infrastructure that are up and down, hours or minutes of the day with different license usage. I need to know in near real time what's going on. And that, of course, is where the automation comes in. So, usual thing again, right? This is a people process technology issue. Of course it is. We know we just can't go buy tooling. We know that there's cultural challenges, the people element that we need to get involved in. So what does that look like if the clicker works? Collaboration. Okay, so again, this is a kind of FinOps thing that you will have seen time and time again, and hopefully you're using this in your organization. But every version that I've seen of this, whether it's out of Gartner, or whether it's out of the FinOps Foundation or others, doesn't include that ITAM and software license management professional. And I'm not sure why, because clearly there are savings opportunities, and if I was to say my cloud is fully optimized, licensing would absolutely be a part of that. The common language, however, we're adding a new layer of complexity, right? You bring these people together, finance have their own language, engineering and the architects, they're all, speaking slightly different language, and then you start to lay in the complexities of software license management and compliance. Yes, it's going to be challenging, but it's absolutely worth the effort of bringing those guys along for the ride. And Brian set the stage here with the Cloud Center of Excellence, okay? That is really what that team are doing, okay? It's about adopting best practices and pushing change out across organizations. Whether it's a Cloud Center of Excellence or some other discipline or change, it's a kind of standard approach to landing that change in an organization. Get the major stakeholders together, set that common language out, include those licensed professionals, and start setting out those best practices. Right? We've heard a lot about that today and how we can get teams to engage, understand best practices, whether that's a hub and spoke model or however you choose to do it. And visibility is ultimately the key, right? Without that, we can't go on and take action and take recommendations because we don't have the business context. Governance, don't like to use that word sometimes, but the trust and verify model maybe that we prefer to adopt from a FinOps point of view, we need to do that in terms of license compliance. That auditability and that risk of being audited, serious fines potentially. So we want to be absolutely clear what's going on there. And then, of course, KPIs, new technologies, new vendors, new licenses, right? There are a few models that Brian mentioned in terms of containers and IBM Cloud Packs. You can guarantee the software vendors are sitting there working out how they can make some more money out of us in the cloud space, right? With different SKUs and license models. In the process side of things, we've got to change as well. identifying current and planned cloud and container usage. That's difficult, right? How does a software asset manager or software license management professional do that right now? It's probably going to be a manual process, and parts of the organization may not have any idea about what their current compliance from a license point of view is, on virtual machines, let alone containers, let alone dedicated hosts and other things. So the process challenge is it's not just going to be a lift and shift of what they're doing on-prem. Understanding those license terms and the conditions, right? Oracle, SQL, Microsoft, and all of those, they're all going to have slightly different SKUs and slightly different terms and conditions that say, yes, you can use what you have here on-prem in these certain situations, right? It's going to be fluid all of the time. And again, a slight change in process for the SAM guys. And then that discovery part, well, we touched on that a little bit earlier. It's not good enough now that it's a discovery once a month that you kind of get a report that goes, yeah, you're pretty close to compliance in terms of what you've used versus what you've purchased. That could be very variable over the period. We've seen this slide, so why does it matter, right? Ton of reasons. Normally I have this and I get to this kind of point and it's like, Jeremy, why should I care? I don't think I've got an issue just now. There's none of you here that aren't kind of using at least one of these services right now, which could leave you exposed to license compliance. So it's absolutely a problem that's relevant to everybody. And really what we're saying here, it's a data problem, okay? Much in the way that solving your FinOps challenges is. What you're trying to do is bring together these data sources, and of course some of that includes the cloud bills themselves, but I'm sure you'll be bringing in data from SaaS providers, from your service management tools, maybe from ITFM and asset management tools, your IT operations stuff as well. And this is really the challenge that we're trying to solve here, certainly at Flexera, is bringing that information together, right? Because it's the contextualization ultimately that is the key, whether that's from a FinOps perspective, but also from an ITAM point of view. So a couple of slides now just to conclude. What next steps could I take, whether I'm a FinOps professional in the room, which I'm sure most of you are, or whether actually you've got involved in ITAM or software license management. On the FinOps side, of course, in the inform phases, can you help with the visibility of what's being consumed? Do you know what the implications are from a licensing point of view across the different technologies that you're using within the cloud space? And do you have a view of the entitlements, contracts and things that might be in place that you could leverage, right? I think a lot of hands went up for Azure usage. Bring your own licensing Azure, hybrid use benefit. It's literally a toggle in the UI, right? Or at the point of provisioning where you could be saving money. So go find out from your software license management team whether you've got, software assurance and software mobility, and you could go and tick some of those boxes, right? It's literally a quick win. And then, of course, we want to do that at scale, right? So what tooling, processes, and automation do you have in place to manage that? You may have something, you may have nothing, right? But let's understand what you've got today, and then you can obviously set a path towards the future. As an ITAM practitioner, do you have any visibility about what's going on in the cloud space? Brian's slide showed us here that the SAM and software license management teams aren't involved in the FinOps practice. They're not involved in the Cloud Center of Excellence. So go get involved in the change process, understand what's going on, understand the different models, right? Reach out to your various vendors and say, well, what are you doing in cloud? What is it that I can do to use the investment that I've already made on-prem, particularly if you're in mid-migration and you're shifting these things across, because you really don't want to be paying, twice for those licenses. And then, of course, how do we make the most of those existing entitlements, but also ensure compliance? Big kind of change here about being compliant, not just about making savings. And then lastly, in the operate phase, how do I do this at scale? How do I do it in near real time? And then ultimately you want to measure and monitor and report on success. So hopefully that gives you a kind of little bit of a flavor as to how you might go around and addressing the challenge. Hopefully it was useful. Brian and I are both here to take questions.
Yeah. Thanks, Brian, very much. Thanks, Jeremy. Just raise your hand and I'll bring the mic around.
So I was curious while there's clearly some overlap here, how often is the topic of somebody having an incomplete picture of cost of goods sold or oh, I've got fully burdened costs, but not really come up when you're dealing with these type of customers where these concepts get introduced?
In terms of COGS being, the fully rounded cost and the visibility aspect of it. Yeah.
Yes.
It kind of rarely comes up, but it should, right? Exactly. So, if I look at customers that are consuming on-demand infrastructure, they're probably paying twice for it, but they don't know it, right? So it's embedded into that COGS measure, but actually they've already paid for that license on-prem. So it's more, for me, about the opportunity to reduce waste, right? Reduce that double paying for it, than it is maybe, it would, of course, influence that COGS if you looked at the bigger picture. Hopefully that answers the question, I guess. Yeah. I don't think it's well understood, I think is the message I'm saying.
Any other questions? All right. Thanks, guys. A round of applause for Brian and Jeremy.
JR here from the FinOps Foundation. Thank you for watching. Please go to FinOps.org if you want to get plugged into this amazing community. And of course, hit subscribe right here on YouTube to get all the future content. Hope to see you soon.